Hello and welcome to this edition of the Law Firm Blueprint. I'm one of your hosts, Jay Ruane, and with me as always is my man, Seth Price. So I never know which way to point now that we got this new software, but it's all looking good, Seth. It's been a while since we did one of these, Seth. How you been, my boy?
And, like AI is great and we know we need to get there, but just getting through the day and looking at numbers and pushing people to the best they can do, it is a grind.
It really is. I just got back myself from getting out of the office. I rarely get out of the office anymore. But I was down in Charleston for the Unreasonable hospitality event that Best Era put on. And that was really fascinating. I know I've read the book Unreasonable Hospitality. I know you have. I know, especially, 11 Madison Park in New York City, a huge, huge restaurant that made waves years ago. And it was really fascinating to meet with some of those people that are mentioned in the book, right? And get to hear their story. A lot of Connecticut connections, so it's cool for me. Turns out one of the speakers knew a girl I dated years ago, so they were around the same age. So it was very cool, but, taking the idea of unreasonable hospitality to a law firm is different than a restaurant, right? And so you have to go to it with open eyes because, I'm dealing with people at the worst part of their life. I don't necessarily need to wow them with, free champagne. I got to actually provide good service. And I think for that, just let me finish. I think for that, the best way to do that as a lawyer is over communicate, because lawyers have such a bad rep for communication that if we can get ahead, and we actually are making some changes this week, we already over communicated. We're going to do even more, because I think that's the way to stand out among other lawyers is to never leave your client wondering what's going to happen.
Well, look, and I think if you go back to the book, which I loved, the great service is table stakes, right? So going to court, basic communication. This is a place charging premium prices. Wasn't just like, a few $1,000s more for a DUI. This was the equivalent of the $20,000 DUI place, right? So you had the ability to take less cases, you had it spaced out, and you had great staff. Even with that, what struck me, and again, we all would love to have the moment where you fill the parking meter, you buy the hot dog and you chop it up. But with each of those things, even the glasses in a box, it takes forethought and labor and bandwidth in order to do that. And that when that is not budgeted, it's a great idea. It's never happening. And
right.
So, just looking at take a PI firm, for example. If your paralegals, pre-lit case managers, whatever you want to call them, have case volumes that start to creep from 80 to 100, 120 to 150, all of a sudden, forget about unreasonable hospitality, there's not even basic hospitality. And so part of this is because this goes back to the reality of what you and I talk about all the time, as far as staffing, when do you hire, right? So you take those questions we get all the time. When do you hire somebody? Do you hire a lawyer or a paralegal? We've talked about that countless times. But if the answer is you're making a decision, which means you're either a little light on labor, on lawyer labor, a little light on admin labor, whatever, however you want to do it, what you're basically saying is you're not at that elite level either place because you're in growth mode. And I think it was Dan Martell, who's consuming a ton of his content recently, has something where he just had a video the other day where he's like, if you're in growth mode, you have one of three things going on. You either have not enough labor, too much labor, or just enough. And you're in growth mode, you're constantly trying to figure out how, that balance so that you don't go out of business. And that, we've never talked about it that way, but essentially that's what you have to do. And for me, this is particularly poignant right now. Look, the current administration in DC, forget about politics, just factually, we are seeing layoffs at numbers that are unbelievable in our market, right? HUD, thousands of people. Department of Education, crazy numbers. Department of Education already, HUD to come, a bunch of these other places, all the government contractors doing with USAID. So all of a sudden, very, very concerned about fee-for-service clients. Will the money be there? Right? So there are all these unknowns. And at the same time, we're staffing for growth. And it is a particularly perilous time because one of the things you normally have is certainty of some sort or another. So right now, not only are you trying to handicap how much labor to put in place to hit what your needs are, but you have the level of volatility right now is just off the charts, at least in the DMV.
It's interesting. We talk about staffing and I think that's, hiring is a problem for lawyers right now across the country. And I made a decision a while back to, I didn't want to be lean. I would rather take home less profit and have an extra set of hands at two different levels, at the lawyer level, at the intake level, and also at the paralegal level. And so we kind of intentionally overstaffed at the intake and the uh, um, at the paralegal level. And wouldn't you know it, I was away in Charleston, and we lost a paralegal and we lost an intake person. And
Which goes to, you weren't overstaffed, you were prepared for that.
I was prepared for it. And so, I didn't freak out because now the people I have can handle our bandwidth, and now we're going to hire and train and get people back in. So we have, and I would rather give up a little bit of profit to have less headaches. And that's the way I decided. I know lawyers who are like, I'm running myself ragged covering cases and running around because I want to eat that profit. And I'm
There's
like,
nothing wrong with it. It's a value decision.
there's nothing wrong. It's a value.
Or you run, as you did for many years, run exactly with what you need, but when somebody quits, you're back in court or you're doubling
Right.
your
And
fee.
now I'm saying, screw that. I'd rather overstaff.
But I think, right, knowing where you are, how long were you quote unquote overstaffed in your opinion for?
Probably about 18 months to 2 years.
That you think was that long? Now,
Yeah,
let me ask you, with that, were you overstaffed or did you grow during that time?
Well, we grew and hired new people, but the people that we had in the sort of overstaffed seat, they weren't the best at anything, but they were passable. Like if I were to do the whole, Jack Welch cut the bottom 10%, I probably would have cut these people last year. But they could do work, and we kept them around so that they could fill in when if you recall, if viewers or listeners recall, last year we had 6 staff members have babies in a 7-8 month period. So we were moving things around. Everything's in flux. We got back to some semblance of normalcy in our office, and then we realized, hey, if they quit, it's not the end of our world. We could restaff, train better. Now we have a better training program. We can, personality. We can spend more time actually hiring people to fill these roles. Now that we know what these roles are and what the talents that those people have, because they didn't exist, and we were just, jamming somebody into that role. So it's actually a net positive for me to have lost these 2 people. I'm excited about it.
Okay, let me take you back to something because you touched on something, and I've been thinking a lot about it. I don't know where it lands, but we are, look, when we started the firm, we had nobody having kids. Then people started having kids. Now, in the current normal, paternity leave is a real thing. So we are handicapping people coming and going. Obviously, you're not, we know we're not firing anybody. We don't want to fire. We want the people back, but you're having to figure out how to get work done for multiple months. DC now has a fund that we pay through taxes where people are able to take longer maternity and paternity time. Okay. That's one, I don't say risk factor, but one up and down that we have to manage and do very effectively in order to keep the high quality. Does part of that quote unquote overstaffing allow for that natural ebb and flow? First part, I'll give you a 2-parter. The second part, which I'm starting to wish that I'm able to track, is when there are things like marital issues and somebody who's going through something that's identifiable, meaning a divorce, is that another place where the person is not out of work, they are still there, but should we be handicapping knowing that there's going to be less production and that we're going to need to layer, additional work there? And it's these, sort of, how do you keep it like this when there are all these ups and downs through different life events?
Well, see, and this is something that I think it's important to discuss, which never really gets discussed in the concept of running a firm, is that, I hire somebody, I'm expecting 40 hours of work out of them a week, but their 40 hours of productive work one week they may only be able to give 20 hours of productive work. I can go back in my own history. I'm not happy about this, but I can remember I it was the end of a relationship before I met my wife, and this is 20 plus years ago. And I can remember coming into the office and literally sitting at my computer and staring at it for an 8-hour day. I accomplished nothing that day. I remember that day because it was it's a visceral memory burned into my brain. But I literally accomplished nothing, and that even wasn't a marriage that was ending. It was just a relationship that was ending. So, yes, I mean, there are going to be people who get divorced or whatever, or have a loss of a family member who will sit and stare at the screen for 8 hours. I think you need to give grace. I think you need to be an understanding employer.
This isn't like you're firing somebody, but it's just if you want to have
Right.
that unreasonable hospitality, if you wanted great service and great quality, is it something that
Starts
as
at
a
home.
business we need to bulletproof against? Because if somebody is staring at the screen for 8 hours a day, how do we make sure that the client doesn't suffer from it?
Well, I think in those situations, I think it's part of your firm culture that there should be a dialogue about it. I mean, I know back when I had that issue, I felt comfortable enough to share with my paralegal, man, this isn't working out. I can't stop thinking about it. I'm not getting shit done. And my paralegal was like, okay, well, hey, I'm going to cancel your phone calls for today because you're not in the right headspace. I'm going to put them down for 2 days from now, and we'll circle back. But I'll reach out. I'll talk to the clients, that type of thing. I think
That's a
you
home
need to
run.
have a
Right.
culture.
The question is with our, and part of it is with the way we are not all in the office all the time. You don't always
Right.
know that. And that's
Well, you
where,
don't, but I think you can have a culture where people are communicating, and their core team knows what's going on in their lives, and so
understood. But it's the piece. There's a piece which you can do through culture. There's a piece you can do through communicating online, but there's also the nonverbal body language when somebody
well,
sees you walk in. And so there, I struggle there. And I'm wondering whether there are patterns that we know when somebody tells you they're pregnant, you have X number of months to prepare for a departure and it's clean. They're not in the office.
right.
Are there other life events that and again, everybody handles things differently, but are there different life events that we need to handicap in order to make sure that we do that? I'll throw another, since we're doing rapid fire. I feel like
Yeah.
haven't had you for a while. I've been raising my LinkedIn game and sort of following a number of the bigger influencers. And a guy actually had a post about Jonathan Pollard, who I met years ago, serendipitously just on an elevator ride in Fort Lauderdale. Is one of the big content creators on there. And he put out a post today saying that he thinks that it's crap that people look at gaps on resumes negatively as a red flag. And there were a lot of people saying that's right, and he had some very good points. Like you shouldn't be looking at somebody like, hey, are they working for the man or not? And it could be they have to take care of a sick parent. But it struck me, and it comes to some of the issues we just talked about. Do you think it's fair? Because I thought that as a business owner, I'm not saying I'm not hiring somebody based on a gap on the resume, but to me, it is a talking point to clarify as to what's going on. And so that somebody saying nothing to see here, I thought was, for a guy that I'm usually like, yeah, I see the point there. To me, I thought that that's actually irresponsible, because if we're trying to figure out how not to have somebody who could melt down at the office, looking at why somebody has gaps is significant in that process.
I think it's hugely significant. In fact, I can share a story that happened to us. We had an associate who was with us who came in, God, 15, 16 years ago. She came in. On her resume, she had done internships in the public defender's office. She had, and then she passed the bar, and there was a year gap in her resume. And I'm like, you got admitted in October, but you're interviewing now, and you don't, like, what have you been doing for the last year? And I just said, I'm just curious that your resume just kind of stopped. And she said, oh, well, I didn't put it on my resume because we have a family member who owns a local factory. They are being audited by the IRS. They had a big mess in their office. I had bandwidth. I had just come out of law school. they wanted somebody they trusted in the family to come in and kind of help their bookkeeper clean up stuff and make sure that they were in compliance. And I was smart enough to do it, but it's not criminal, so I didn't put it on my resume. And I'm kind of just working for a family. It's not working in law. I'm
No,
like,
no,
well,
and
you're
look,
doing
and I
law.
love it, and we've had those, and
I
that's
said,
great, right? That's a or you know what? I had a kid, and I wanted to, I wanted to
right,
basically just get a reset. Fine, that's not the issue. But when you get the answer, oh yeah, those 3 months, yeah, I started a job, I didn't put it on there. All of a sudden, to me, that's valuable information as to whether they had a meltdown somewhere, and there was a
true.
real issue. Um, and so to me, I just to me it's a valuable data point, not because we should all feel that we have to be on the hamster wheel 24/7, but a is there something being not disclosed
Well,
first?
then this okay. So this then opens up a whole can of worms because what about those instances where you give somebody a 90-day severance and you terminate them? You say, hey, look, this isn't working out. You should look for another job. But we'll keep you on the website, and you go look. So they're to their new employer, they look like they're just I've run my course. I'm not happy at the firm. It's time for me to change. But they were getting canned, and
But can't mean different.
you're a
Different Rehoma,
participant
there are
in the
different reasons.
ruse that
But
at that there you're a participant in the ruse that they weren't a flame out by keeping them allowing them to have you on their resume continually while they're looking for jobs. So you're solving your own problem. Other people may be doing that same thing, and so even without a gap in the resume, you can still have red flags, I
oh,
guess.
no, 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 100%. This isn't like an either or. And look, I'm a big fan of that. I think that because look, the reason somebody's leaving may, like going back to the old dating, it's you, not me. It's that whole concept. There are a lot of reasons why people leave a place. It may be your finances. It may be their fit there. It could be a culture fit with people that would they be fine. So like, I'm humble enough to know the truth is somewhere in the middle on that. And frankly, you're not going to offer that if it's a flame out, right? You do that when
Right.
it's a decent person that's not right for you, presumably. If somebody's threatening to sue you, they're not remaining on your website. So,
Right.
and it comes back to, you know, to me, all of this is powerful. And it's nice to say we shouldn't consider that. But if somebody went to care for a family member, that's great. My question to all I want to know is when they chose to do that and left their last job, was it a smooth transition, or do they say I got to leave today, this is your problem, not mine? Because those are the things that, just like dating, how somebody broke up with somebody else is likely what's going to happen to you. Like, is this something that is how does that fit into the bigger picture? Because we talk about testing for culture and personality tests and all this stuff. That's great, but I want to just know, to me, is this somebody who is going to land the plane whenever they leave an opportunity, or is it somebody who's blowing up the joint?
Yeah, the hardest part of this job of running a law firm is finding the right people at the right time and putting them in the right seat. I mean, it's also, there are people who you may meet early on in your career who may be a great person for your firm 10 years later, but then they're gone. They're not in that orbit anymore and you can't get them. And so it's really making do with what's available to you at the time and squeezing the best out of every single employee. Because there are people that I met 15 years ago that I would love to have brought in, but we weren't ready for them. And now they're entrenched in something else and they're not going to leave that place.
I mean, I guess I'm going back to the red flag thing. It's stuck in my craw, which is what, are you looking at length of tenure at other jobs? If somebody spent 9 to 15 months at their last 4 jobs, is that to you a factor that goes into whether or not past performance, no guarantee of future results, but does tenure play a role?
I think it does to us, and we would ask about that. We would say, "Hey, it looks like you've had 4 jobs in the last 3 years or last 6 years. Tell us what you're looking for, because if they say, well, I'm looking for X, Y, or Z, and you can't provide it, if they say, oh, I really want to work a hybrid environment because my dog is getting old and it's important for me, and I was at one job and it was all remote, and then they said, no, you got to come back. And then at my next job, they advertised it as remote, but then they said, no, in office and they did a return to office thing. So I left. And well, if I can accommodate that and you're good, we'll do that. I think you got to have that conversation early on, in stage X, Y, or I mean, and that's another question I have for you. If we want to pivot a little, I have now decided that we need to do a better job in the interview process, whereas we're going to actually designate um, interview stages with this is the topic we're going to discuss. So in the first, it's going to talk about your life goals, how you might fit in here, where do you think you can best serve us. Then in the second one, let's talk about, what kind of environment makes you best, and can we provide that? And then the third one might be, how do you interact with other people? And instead of doing like these 2-hour interviews with people, break them down into 15, 20-minute calls and get to know people over an extended period of time, rather than bringing in different people to hammer them on a question.
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
I
but
think
like,
we
look,
could.
but
I think in my
the flip
office,
side is if it's talent, they're not staying on the market that long. So if if you're gonna spread this out over 2 weeks, they're all like, if it's an A player, they may not be there. My
yeah, that's
attitude with
true.
interviews is if it's an A player and we're there, I want to know, can they be interviewed within the next 48 hours? And if it's outside of that, I want to know why. It's got to be because they have an obligation, being that they can't be there for it, but that we want to, not that I want to hire fast and not that I want to make a mistake, but I want to be able to get to the point where they know that we're in play, so that it's not, we're not far enough along in the process when there's somebody that we're, fighting for.
So how do you know if someone's an A player without like in the?
Well, I mean, coming through the screen, we're at the point now where we have a recruiter who is letting us know, and we get the sense that somebody's special and that their resume and their screen are strong, and that we if that's the case for specific stuff. We talk about how hard it is to find a criminal defense lawyer, and we asked the question, are you interviewing anywhere else? Not because, just to know timing, so that if they
Right.
aren't, if they say, you know what, no, you're my only place, then okay, I'll follow the Jay Ruane philosophy and try to spread this out. But if they're like, no, I'm actively interviewing and you're now a step behind because I've already done my second interview with some people, we better get our act together, because we're going to want to know, if we want to have a shot at this person, we better be prepared to be in play sooner than later.
But how does that change now, given the dynamic in your home market of DC, with a ton of freshly unemployed people who are coming from career bureaucrat type jobs where they haven't had to produce in a private firm or respond to client? I mean, look, nobody needs to say, calling the DMV or calling a federal office to speak to somebody. They'll get to you when they get to you. Thank you very much.
Historically, we didn't make the transition, with rare exceptions, from a prosecutor into a defense attorney. Yes, but like from an administrative governmental job, it's pretty hard to transition to the private sector. And right now, there are blogs and websites and webinars all talking about this. I desperately need a criminal defense lawyer in a particular jurisdiction. And there's somebody who hits the avatar for what you're talking about, in the sense that they've been in a governmental role doing what we wanted them to do. They were now at one of the big federal agencies in a litigation role. They could easily substantively do what I need. They could flip back to what they were doing, but are they willing to hustle? Which is what a criminal defense lawyer is going to do. Are they willing to be at a private practice? This isn't like, are you willing to like work 70 hours a week? But this is, are you willing to take off the veneer of what you had in government? And we're literally at the point now, we like the person. She could do what we want. I always say to people, this is a self-selecting job. We know pretty quickly if they have the substantive chops. Do you want what we're selling, and how we have positioned ourselves in the market? And here, we kicked it a week to have more in person, and just figure out, as you're saying, you talked about all those different things. If you want to be at home because your dog's there, but this job is going to require you to be in a different courthouse morning and afternoon, 4 days a week. That like, we want to know that, because I want to know that going in. And
Right.
it's frustrating, because there's so much talent. I just came from a networking thing at GW Law today, and some kid is telling us that he wants to go into government contract, and I'm like, wrong moment in time to now. He's first year. By the time he's a third year, maybe, who knows? But right now, this is the
I want to go into finances in the fall of 2008.
right.
Like,
And like again, if you want to do it, you'll figure it out if you're that rock star. But if you're like, I'm not sure what I want to do, like the last thing and it's also just tone deaf to what's going on. It is, there's so much talent coming on the market, but I think that I'll make an analogy. I want to see if you buy it. We've talked over the years. We have Amazon that's in our market, right? Their HQ2 didn't really quite take off, but if you hired a person in an administrative role that the market's at 100,000 for, Amazon was paying a $50,000 bonus or a $60,000 bonus on top of the salary. So here's $100,000 and here's $5,000 a month just for being here. Now Amazon's turns the screws pretty hard. It's not an easy place to work, but and we saw this over the years. If somebody has a job which is paying a number above market, I never want to be the person that says, you know what, you're really only worth 100,000. You're not worth $1.60, right? And I have found it as a policy, not bringing somebody in with a substantial reduction in salary, even if it's what market is saying it should be. I want that person to go to market, take a bunch of interviews, and find out that is market. I don't want to be the a-hole that says, no, you're not worth that, because I think it always ends badly. And so I am concerned a little bit when it's bringing people from government who have been there for a significant period of time. I don't want to be the person that says this normal doesn't exist anymore. It's a new normal. Like that job isn't there. If you want that job, you should wait for the job to come back. But if you're in the private sector, we behave differently. And that is, do we want to be the person who is sort of bringing somebody from one lifestyle into another, just like or do we have to wait for that person to recalibrate to recognize, hey, this is not coming back, or I've gone somewhere else and this is how they are, and we are a kinder, gentler version of a for-profit organization, but we aren't the same as where they're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I don't want to get political here, but I think part of the problem with hiring former government employees is that the government sector jobs are not matching private sector pay anymore. I mean, you used to have fantastic benefits when you worked for your local municipality because the job paid, 75 cents to the dollar of what you can make in the private market. So you got these pensions, you got great benefits, and that sort of made up for the fact
stability.
And that made up for it. That but now the private market is paying not as good benefits, less stability, and not paying as much as you can make. And that's why for years I lost tons of lawyers to the state service. They would leave me and go to the public defender's office because I couldn't pay them what they could make in the public defender's office as a starting salary.
We've seen it with court appointed. Court appointed in DC is at like 90 an hour, and it's not like nobody's getting rich off of it, but it's changing if an associate can get that and fill their dance card, it's going to price you out of a junior associate role.
Right, because they're making $180,000 a year, and plus whatever private business they can scrounge up, even if they're not aggressively marketing, maybe they can get to 250, and go for themselves.
Right, and it's a maybe, right? There's breakage, right. There's this, there's that. It's not perfect, but those people without that number would not. So what you're saying, like, it's an interesting moment where I think what you're alluding to is there are situations where the government salary is above the private sector. So you have somebody coming out where it's a double whammy. It's lifestyle and potentially money.
Right.
As far as the private sector values those skills at.
Yeah, and I think as private sector employers, we are really in a terrible situation because the talent that's out there, is not dealing with reality as to what they're worth.
Well, hold on.
I'm sure you and I. I mean, I've seen it myself when I've approached other lawyers who are, senior status, and I say, hey, why don't you join us?
But I want to be very careful. I want to divide that between, look, I have not seen that from individuals. I've seen it from people trying to sell their practice more. Historically, we may see it with the government, may or may not, but I am more concerned, and I just because I think it's an important distinction when somebody's trying to port their retirement, to bring their practice somewhere. I see that's where there's a much greater gap. The individuals, that's why I think the market is pretty good because people pretty quickly see what is out there and calibrate themselves. It's not day one, which is why I like to wait several months because if somebody's way out of whack, the market will take care of it. It's something where it's a book of business where, I remember I was trying to acquire somebody's practice, and it's a whole another show for another day. And, this guy just bought out his partner 5 years before for $250,000. So I'm like, okay, maybe the thing's worth $500,000. It's gone down since that level. And the guy's like, well, I want 2 million cash up front and a third on the back end. And I'm just like, so but the bigger picture with the government piece is making sure that we have you, just like we're dealing with in DC, another analogy. We have all this office space, C-level office space, B-level office space that's empty. And they're saying, okay, well, if this is all empty because of work from home and now the government's going to cancel leases, can we turn it into residential, which we need so badly? And you know what? 1 out of 10 of those properties, 1 out of 20, you can do it. But in other places, the plumbing and electrical is so prohibitive that it's a white elephant. You can't do anything with it.
Right.
And so the question is, these are human beings. And how are we going to retrofit from commercial to residential? How are we going to take it from government to private sector in a humane, positive way where there will be people that we want to hire in the private sector, understanding that the people who are leaving the government sometimes after decades need to somehow recalibrate because it's a different cadence in the private sector.
Yeah, it really is. We are in the beginning stages of, I mean, the availability of talent is going to change as government, at least for us. There's going to be some former U.S. attorneys that are going to be looking for jobs.
Right. No, and so look, the scarier part, I'll conclude with this, is we're sitting there. It's a ridiculous whammy in that, yes, amazing talent. Because I'm not worried about the cadence. Justice Department, U.S. attorneys, they work their asses off, right? So that's
Right.
going to be a great possibility. But if nobody's being prosecuted,
right,
what do I do? It's like, and so now it's like there's all this amazing talent there. It's an embarrassment of riches. But if we're sitting there wondering, are we going to have any cases for them? It's
right.
that.
So it's hard right now. We are in an exceptionally hard time to forecast anything other than today,
and even
because
that's hard.
And even that's hard. I mean, it's really, we are in a time of flux. Probably. I mean, listen, 5 years ago today is when they announced stay home COVID. Like, I think we are in similar situations, not necessarily health wise, but business wise right now, because we don't know what the next month, 90 days, or anything is going to bring. I mean, I said to my accountant and my bookkeeper, I was like, I want to hold back and store more cash, and build up a bigger, safety security fund right now, because I just think I might need it.
No, it's unsettling, and I just I'll throw this out as an aside. BluShark lost a Canadian client who's like, we just don't want to deal with U.S. people.
Wow.
Yeah. That was a humbling moment. This was, it is, it didn't matter who we voted for, where we stood politically. They were like, yep, we're just making a blanket. And that's where this, the unintended, the consequences of erratic political moves. There are times when you're like, you know what, we really need as a country, we get it. This is a fundamental business. We know we need to raise this tariff in order to pull something. Like, I get it, but when you're just, this isn't, I don't get the impression this is thoughtful. It is knee jerk and then we'll figure it out afterwards. And, we're sitting
It's hard to run a business.
Yeah, that's my point.
And that's the thing. And so what I think everybody who's listening needs to do is just sort of be intentional. Take that extra hour this week and actually think about, okay, look, we're lawyers. We're trained to think about all the potential consequences of any motion that we file. all of those things. So now it's time to actually sit back and be like, if this happens, we go here. If this happens, we go here. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I just talked to somebody the other day about starting a new law firm, and they wanted me for my administrative and marketing backgrounds. They want to do the work end of it, and I was like, well, I have no interest in that area of law. It is B2C. Maybe I'll consider something like that being a part of it because it's another area that doesn't have the necessarily same market constraints that criminal defense does. So it's out there. So I'm trying to be proactive, and I encourage everybody out there to be a proactive as well.
Awesome.
Awesome. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us this week on the Law Firm Blueprint. Thank you so much for joining us today. Of course, if you want to take us on the go, you can subscribe to the Law Firm Blueprint podcast wherever you get your podcast. And of course, you can catch this show live every Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific, live on LinkedIn and live in our Facebook group, The Law Firm Blueprint, which you should be a member of. But for now, I am Jay Ruane. He is Seth Price. We are The Law Firm Blueprint. Bye for now.